Hello, I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today is a conversation that I've been raving about having with anyone who'll listen in my orbit, because the book that today's guest wrote completely changed my view of a really significant aspect of my life, and I know it's a significant aspect of yours as well. And it's rare, isn't it, when I read a lot. I get a lot of information, I learn a lot of ideas, I share most of them here with you, but sometimes something changes within you when you read a book, or you might hear a conversation, or it even could be a meme, just something that really resonates, and it's presented at the time you need it in the format that you love, and it really strikes a chord. And what I'm talking about today, I really hope, first of all, when I'm speaking with my guest today, to spark that in you, but I couldn't recommend the book more highly. And as soon as I saw the title, I just immediately jumped online and ordered it, which probably is ironic given some of the things that we'll probably talk about today, this idea of instant gratification, but I needed it. The book is called Good with Money: Reprogramming Your Spending Habits and Take Control of Your Money. And the minute I saw it, I identified with it because, very cleverly, Emma Edwards, who is the author of this book and my guest today, she knows that that's something that we want to feel. We want to feel like we're good with money. And those of us who are parents, we want to instill that feeling, and not only the feeling, but the actions that good with money kind of represent. And whilst I was never one to spend a huge amount of money on lots of things, lots of luxury items or designer clothes or things like that, I never felt like I had a handle on the way I thought about money and my relationship with it. And I wonder how you feel, because I don't know, I keep reading that people are a bit dysfunctional around money, and perhaps I was once feeling that way, but I'm not anymore. And it's been over 6 months since I've read Emma's book, and I am feeling so in control and such a weight off. And so it is with absolute joy that I introduce today's guest, who is Emma Edwards. She is a financial behaviour specialist, which I love because she really helps us with behaviour change, which is really what it comes down to once we've got some really key skills. She is an expert in the psychological and behavioural side of money, and she joins us from Melbourne in Victoria in Australia for our international listeners. And Emma, I am just so pumped to have you on the podcast. So thanks so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me, Jodie. I'm really excited to chat about all things being good with money.
Yeah, you are doing such a wonderful job in your socials, in your book, and obviously on your podcast as well. So we'll connect you with all of Emma's work, of course, throughout the conversation. But Emma, you weren't always good with money. And I know that that's sort of a part of what's really brought you, as it often does, brings somebody to the work that they do, feeling so passionate about helping others. Can you tell us kind of a bit about your journey with your money mindset and how you kind of evolved and grew to be kind of leading the way with this charge?
Yeah, so as I sort of talk about in the book, I'd always not felt like I was that good with money. I was sort of much more on the spender scale of the spender versus saver kind of category, which most people tend to index slightly closer to one than the other in general, even though there are a number of nuances that kind of surround the spender and saver narrative. I'd always been quite good at working hard and earning money, but not really earning good money, just earning a lot of I work quite a lot of shifts at like my minimum wage jobs and that kind of stuff. And I kind of, I don't know, I'd always loved spending money. You know, if I'd got given money by like a grandparent or something on my birthday or something, I'd I'd been a spender of that money, and spending kind of gave me this real kind of thrill of independence that I think I really craved. And that was really the only thing I knew how to do with money, was to spend it and kind of get value from it in the immediate sense. I didn't really have that delayed gratification, and I didn't really have a view of why there was any kind of value in saving. And there's a number of reasons that kind of contribute to that for lots of people. But I think also for me, I'd really sort of tumbled into my financial behavior was sort of quite deeply linked to other things going on in my life. I often say to people that money can be like a mirror, and that's true in good times and in bad. If you want to know somebody's if you want to know someone's priorities, look at their financial behavior. Whether they're the same priorities that they think that they have or not, is another question. But where I'd sort of struggled with my body image and my self-esteem, and growing up through diet culture and that kind of thing, my financial behavior really reflected that. I spent a lot of money trying to fix myself. I spent a lot of money on any sort of solution that I felt like I could get my hands on to be thinner, to be prettier, to be more, to kind of fix all the things that I'd been conditioned to believe that were wrong with me. And so that became a really big part of me getting good with money. And that's when I sort of realized that I was really passionate about people that had that much more complicated relationship with money, where the mathematical side is kind of quite difficult to deal with and quite irrelevant, really, when your money habits are so deeply tied to other things. You've got to focus on those first before you can actually take in and act on what might make mathematical sense.
I read you wrote you were one rebrand away from finally feeling good enough. And if it's not one thing, it's another. We're never short of things that are being put in front of us to solve our problems, so to speak. And I know one of the things that you speak about is this idea, well, the consumption, the instant gratification, the e-commerce, there's less pain when it comes to spending our money when we're spending online. And I know the first chapter of your book is give yourself a break. Because I think we can be so hard on ourselves, can't we, that we're not good with money, which is this kind of resounding kind of idea that we want to feel like we've got a handle on things, and that we can save more than we spend so that we're living within our means, but also spending on things that we want for ourselves, and knowing that by saying no to one thing enables us more to say yes to something else. And help us, please, can you just relieve us of some of the shame and the burden that comes with kind of feeling like, well, why can't I do this? I know I should save more than I spend. Why am I finding it so hard?
Yeah, there's a unique kind of shame that is reserved for things that we think we should be able to do and that we struggle with. It's not, the same kind of shame that you might feel if you tried to run a marathon and you found that difficult, because we're expected to find that difficult. Only a very small number of people in the world will ever do that. But when it's money, it's this sort of ever-present challenge. And because of the historical taboo around money, we haven't talked about how hard it is to manage. And so everybody sort of acts like they know what they're doing. And some people do know what they're doing, but they don't really tell anybody about that. And those of us that didn't know what we were doing, we had to kind of pretend like we did, while harboring this big secret that we didn't know what we were doing. And so I think that's where a lot of that shame starts to come from, because we know that we should be doing it, and we have this idea that there's this default setting and that is being a saver, and anything outside of that is wrong. But I kind of, in the book, I really get people to challenge that. One, by presenting a number of reasons why we are naturally not programmed as human beings to be good with money. For a start, the way that our brains work, the way that we have evolved over time, we're not wired to hoard resources on an individual level. We're wired to use resources in the moment and share them with our communities. So the societal sort of structure that we live in now kind of goes directly against what that natural programming would do. But then on top of that, there's sort of a number of externalities that contribute to, as you mentioned, of the online shopping, of the being able to tap our cards now. Even you and I, Jodie, will have grown up in a very different time in terms of the physicality of money. digital payments are relatively new, and cash post-COVID is almost non-existent. We're now able to buy things from our phones and pay with our phones now with things like Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, that kind of thing. And so there's a number of externalities that really kind of override any kind of intervention that would slow down our decision making and help us make better decisions. And then on top of that, there's the emotional lens, which is kind of an internal and an external side of things. But that is, all of that program that I talked about, where kind of my priority, and this is true for a lot of women of my generation and yours, our priority was not financial independence, financial security, financial freedom. Our priority was everything else. Our priority was the number on the scale. We were conditioned to, try that new Jane Fonda workout or whatever it is. That we just weren't put in the conversations or involved in the conversation around our finances. And I think unless you had somebody in your life that was making sure you were privy to that information, it's not only that as human beings we find things difficult, as women we have been deliberately excluded from the financial conversation as well, and distracted with a number of other priorities as well.
Emma, can you share more, please, about kind of some of these money taboos and the differences sort of for men and for women in terms of understanding and being brought into the conversations, and education and expectations, I think too, because I know when I was growing up, my dad was the one who worked and my mum was the one who stayed at home, and things are very different now. So I'd love to know more.
Yeah, the financial taboo is kind of one of the most common taboos that people might be familiar with. We might have grown up around narratives like it's rude to ask how much somebody earns. That's a really big one. I remember, and I didn't even grow up in a particularly traditional kind of environment. I grew up with a single mum and we did everything on our own. But my mum used to get very offended if somebody would ask her how much she paid for something. She would have bought something from Aldi, I guess, modern equivalent, and be offended when somebody asked her how much it was, even though she'd kind of gone into the conversation ready to tell somebody about a really great find that she'd purchased. But it was rude then to ask how much something cost. And it's a really complex taboo, and I don't think we have it in quite the same way anymore. But you can definitely see how different people feel about that taboo, even in my life, where I've got, a very progressive circle. Lots of people work in the money space as well. And there's differing levels of how open people are willing to be about their finances then as well. And I think some of it comes down to that shame. Some of it comes down to, fairly toxic sort of class structures and what that reveals about you. I had a conversation with a friend earlier on today, actually, where we said that, interestingly, I think the taboo is even strongest at the top, at the top end of town, I suppose. I think the people that adhere to the taboo most often are perhaps the wealthier people. It's a complex one, but I think that it really does. It only serves to uphold the complexities of managing our personal finances and keep certain people out of certain conversations. As you've said, I mentioned in the book how alarmingly recently it is that women could have a credit card, that women could have a bank account on their own. It's no wonder that, no sooner than that was able to happen, we were then sort of served all of these alternatives for ways to use our money. Okay, so we can have a bank account, but we weren't then taught how to grow that bank account. We were taught not so much taught, but we were shown a number of, diet products that we could purchase with our money. And women have long been sort of the decision maker in the household, or the money manager in the household, even when they couldn't have their own finances. But this is sort of going off topic of the taboo slightly, but speaking a bit more to that sort of female nature of finances. You look at things like the diet and the wellness industry, and it's billions and billions of dollars. But when you think about it, those billions of dollars have come from women. And so imagine if we hadn't had all of the motivation that we had to purchase all of those things. Where could that money have been? What could we have done with that money? And that's where I think it gets really interesting when we talk about the gendered view of finances and the way that men might have been. I don't know if it's a more open or if it's more of a a participation type thing, but you might have seen the side by sides of magazines where men have sort of got, 10 steps to invest this year or 10 stocks to invest in this year. And women have got not only how to save money on your groceries, but here are 10 steps to slimmer arms. It's
Yes.
just, it's not only an omission, it's a diversion of attention.
Yeah, I love that it was so relatable the way that you are talking about that in the work that you're doing, and I imagine there are listeners who can relate to that as well. But one of the things that I know that you've said and written about is that every dollar that we don't spend is a dollar that we can save, or if we're intentional about our spending, we are thinking about, right, well, I'm saying no to this, but I'm also, in saying no to this, I'm saying yes to that, or I'm saying yes to that a little bit further down the track because it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of save for something that might be really important. But one of the things I guess I want to touch on is this idea that a lot of the spending that we do can be really emotional, can't it? And this idea of retail therapy. I mean, I have talked a lot about therapy. A recent episode was couples therapy. We talk about seeing the psychologist, going to see a counsellor, and the role of therapy in our mental health. And we do kind of joke about retail therapy. Ha ha, I'm going to go and do some shopping. But it's really one of these habits that we can get caught up in that can really take us away from our financial goals. Can you speak more to those kind of habits, please?
Yeah, emotional spending, coming back to the idea of shame, I think that emotional spending and shame are very deeply linked as well. And it can become a bit of a cycle if you spend emotionally, and I'll talk a bit more about what that can look like in a minute. But if you spend emotionally and then you're faced with the consequences of that, and then you feel like you're even worse with money, so you try and make a change, but then you emotionally spend again, it can get into a cycle. I'm sure you're familiar with the shame avoidance cycle, where the shame that's kind of created by our behavior creates more avoidance, which makes it hard to then tackle the behavior that we're trying to change in the first place. And when it comes to emotional spending and retail therapy, there's a number of things going on. Firstly, in terms of like getting that hit of dopamine that we're also familiar with now that we're just social media consumption machines. It's true. When you buy something, you get a good feeling. So that idea of retail therapy is real, and the reason our brains keep wanting it is because when we do get that hit, it's one of the easiest ways to get that hit. Same with keeping on scrolling social media. It's just the easiest way, it's the cheapest thrill to get sort of the hit that we want. When it comes to emotional spending, there's those sort of, I guess, brain dynamics that make it something that is normal to reach for. But there's also, all of those insecurities that I talked about before. And sometimes you can get like a double hit from one, the emotional spend of getting that hit of dopamine from handing over money. But then you can also get this hit of that good buzzy feeling because you have all of these stories that your brain's created about what it is that you're buying. In the book, I talk about this idea of your internal creative director. And it's sort of processing the world and creating stories for you to understand the world. And when it comes to buying things, and when we might reach for retail therapy, there is that, of course, immediate effect of buying something, making you feel good. But then there's also honoring those stories that your creative director might be telling you. Like if it is having a bad body image day, your emotional spending behavior might be buying an outfit that makes you feel good, and then you're getting a double hit to that emotional sort of that emotional spike, because you're able to have the enjoyment from the spending, but also you think that you're going to get this relief from this other problem. And so that's sort of where consumerism comes into it, and all of these things that we're able to buy, and the proximity that we have to being able to buy these things now from 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, from wherever you are. You can spend money from your phone now. And you can get those kind of hits of relief that you crave from anywhere at any time. There's just absolutely no break from it. And that's something that sort of I really experienced, was that emotionally charged relationship with handing over my money. And when that sort of collided with all of my other programming around money, it really created the perfect storm for it to be very, very difficult for me to hold on to money. And speaking to those insecurities again, when you sort of say that example of, a dollar spent, a dollar not spent is a dollar available for saving, or a dollar not spent is a dollar available for something else. I think another sort of common blind spot that for a lot of women in particular that we often overlook is that idea that, you mentioned from the book of a dollar not spent is a dollar that you can put towards something else. I think personally speaking from my own experience, it's actually been quite a journey. It sounds naff, but a journey of self-discovery to some degree to actually look beyond the immediate gratification sense of spending money and things you can use money for, and actually get to know yourself to a degree and actually get to respect yourself to a high enough degree that you would see value in putting money aside for the future. Now, some people haven't experienced this, and so they don't relate on that level. But for people that have experienced it, it hits so deeply, because one of the biggest sort of realizations I had on my, I guess, financial awakening was that I didn't really have a connection to my future self. I didn't really have the level of respect I didn't really have respect for myself at all on a level of respecting my body image, of my level of self-esteem. And when we don't have those things, it's kind of no wonder that we don't have as much of an incentive or a motivation to save money for the person that we're going to be in the future, because we're very, very consumed with these immediate insecurities and these immediate priorities. I'm sure a lot of people listening will relate to the weight of having, pun intended, the weight of having lose weight or get fit or, finally go to the gym or get rid of my arm fat on their to-do list for years and years and years, because we weren't taught to accept ourselves. We were taught to fix ourselves. And that, for me, when that lifted and when I was able to let go of that, that really made way for me to realize, hang on, no wonder I haven't been saving money, because I've kind of been consumed with these other priorities. And I haven't been able to connect to that kind of balance environment of, if I don't do this, I can save for this, because it's just been such a scramble to try and be enough for so long that, that your money does get, especially when you don't have loads and loads of it. If you've got endless amounts of money, you can kind of fit in more stuff. But when you're quite limited on the amount of financial capacity that you've got, and you're trying to, manage the household income and everything else as you already are, it can be quite, disempowering to be dealing with all of those other things in terms of your sense of self. And that's why I always say getting good with money starts with getting to know yourself.
And you spoke about mindset, and I think when I think about what was it about your book that really changed for me, wasn't that I didn't know that there were things that I was spending money on that I might not have needed, or that it was an impulse buy, or that I couldn't have made some changes. There were lots of changes I was intellectually aware that I could have been making, but it was the mindset change. It was this idea that it was being intentional. I wonder if you can speak more to this idea that we, in slowing down and stopping and just changing the way we think about things, that we can actually develop a freedom from spending that we'll never miss. I don't miss shopping for clothes at all. I will return to shopping. But if you could speak more to this mindset shift and maybe help listeners to kind of arrive, oh golly, I'm so rambling. I just wanted to share that little bit about the clothing. But so in your work, you do offer different ways to support people to rethink their spending habits, and you've got Spend Timber, and I know you've got your wardrobe project and things. So where are some of the places that people who are listening who are thinking, hey, I want to be good with money? Obviously, get the book. Please get the book. And we'll learn where you can connect with Emma towards the end of the conversation. But anyone listening who's thinking, hey, I want this for me, I'm ready, where is a really nice place for somebody to start if they're feeling sort of quite shameful about their spending habits and ready to take that first step forward to kind of getting some more power back over their finances?
Yeah, the first thing that we always need in that situation is awareness. So the first thing I would get people to do is actually find a safe space psychologically and physically to actually have a look at where your money is going. And then don't just look at that in a mathematical sense, but look at that in an emotional sense and in a values sense, and get really clear on, well, not even get really clear, but start to unravel, I suppose, the story that your financial behavior is telling you. Like, where is your money going? What is your financial position? What are the sort of modalities in which you are spending your money? You know, are you spending money that you've got? Are you spending money that you haven't got? Are you spending money on non-essentials to the point that you then create difficulty for yourself trying to pay for essentials? What sort of structure is there in your finances? As you'll know from reading the book, part 4 is about building out a structure for your healthy and mindful spending habits to exist, while still making sure that you've taken care of your essential expenses and that you're paying yourself first and you're putting money aside for future goals and things like that. And really sort of taking a deeper look at your financial behavior as it relates to your life and your emotions. And from there, that's why I wrote the book in the way that I did, because a lot of people have read something like The Barefoot Investor, which, don't get me wrong, is an excellent book, and it's transformed the finances of hundreds of thousands of people. I think it's estimated in Australia more than 1 in 20 households has a copy of that book. That's just how impactful that book has been. I think, though, that part of the reason I wrote the book in the way that I did, without this sort of, this is the system, do this and it will work for you,
Yes.
is I want people to take a step back. And as much as I would love to give you a 7-step hit list of things that will definitely work and that sort of thing, for me, I needed to address my own unique relationship with money before any of those more practical things would work. And so that's why we spend the first 3 parts of the book looking at that stuff behind the numbers.
Yes.
And then we kind of use the structure to scaffold around that.
Before you go on, I appreciate this approach because I've read The Barefoot Investor. I've got the books for the kids, and it's like a how-to, but the way that you approach it was so relatable. And I just really want to acknowledge that and thank you for that, because you start to kind of realize, hey, I'm not the only one. And the fact that you spoke about shame in the beginning was that we don't talk about it. And so if you don't talk about it, you don't know what other people are going through, and therefore you feel, much more alone and much less inclined to want to talk about it, because that's the cycle that you end up in. And so I really want to acknowledge that. But I also want to come back to this idea that when we stop to look at our finances, and that creates a huge amount of anxiety. That is something that can just make people's stomachs sink to the floor, this idea. And we need to do it. And we absolutely need to, because we don't know where we can go if we're not aware of what we've been doing and where we've been. And so what words of advice do you have? And, we obviously in a sort of a 45-minute conversation, we can't address all of the challenges that people are feeling. But for anyone who thinks, yes, I'm going to do one thing after listening to this conversation, that is get a handle on what's happening. And then they open their credit card statement or start to kind of look at what's been happening with their spending habits and just feel that overwhelming anxiety that they want to shut the laptop and just run away and avoid it. What would you say?
I firstly would say be very careful of any instances where you feel the need or even the motivation to fix everything and go through a transformation.
Yeah.
I think that we have a really interesting relationship with behavior change as women, and I think that's a hangover from the diet era and the fitness era of, 8-week challenge this, how I went from this to this, how blah, blah, lost X amount of weight or whatever. And I think, the movies that we watch, and I talk about this briefly in the book, but the movies that we watch, The Devil Wears Prada, don't get me wrong, it's my favorite movie of all time. But what has been a very common theme in a lot of female-focused films and media, even TV shows like Ugly Betty, that kind of thing, is this big sort of crescendo transformation where everything that was wrong with her is not wrong with her anymore. And now she's good enough. And I think that it's really tempting to apply that same approach to any kind of change, especially money. So first of all, be very careful if you're thinking, right, I am forever changed now. I'm not going to do any of this anymore, and I'm going to act completely differently. And if you're already sort of thinking about when everything's done, because one, that oversimplifies the complexities and the challenges that we'll go through when it comes to behavior change. A bit like in the same way, if you're giving up smoking, for example, and you start going, that's it, I'm not smoking anymore. You can't just jump to the end. You've got to think about, well, what about when I crave one? What about when my routine would usually have me smoking? It's the same with our money. Don't put pressure on yourself to draw a line in the sand and immediately be forever changed. It needs to be an iterative process. It needs to be a developmental process. And actually thinking about it in a similar way to the way you might think about personal development or even management of anxiety and things like that. It's not something that just like switch flips overnight. And I think the sooner that we can embrace that, the more room we can make to actually take the practical steps. If you are doing that task of getting aware, that's all you need to do for that time, because the awareness will help to inform your behavior in some small way. It's not a magic pill and a quick fix. And because you have this awareness now, you will start behaving immediately differently. But I think the worst thing we can do for our finances is, and I used to do this over and over again, when I had credit card debt to pay off, I would just be out living my life, avoiding thinking about that debt, going, oh, it'll be okay, or I'll pay it off when, oh, maybe I'll use my tax return, or maybe I'll, all of these future scenarios, but broadly avoiding it and telling myself it wasn't a big deal. And then one day I would get this surge of motivation to be like, I'm going to pay it off. I'm going to pay it off by the end of this year. And it was like $10,000 equivalent of credit card debt. And I was earning like $35,000 a year. So in October, I wasn't going to pay that off by the end. It was mathematically impossible.
Yes.
And as I would later come to learn, there were, a number of other things that needed to go into that kind of pursuit of change. But I would get this rush of like a hunger for a transformation. And I would want to do everything all at once and just be a completely different person overnight. And not only will that not get you the outcome that will be beneficial for you, but it will, you're setting yourself up to fail, and that will create more shame and probably put you further paces back from a psychological perspective from being ready to make the changes that you want and need to make. So that was a very long-winded way of saying go easy on yourself, but I feel like it's slightly richer than just saying go easy on yourself.
I really appreciate the fact that you have spent some time talking about this is something to be aware of, this idea of overnight transformation. And I'm probably, listening kind of and thinking back to some of the things that I've shared, I feel as though your book really did transform the way I think about money. But I've been thinking about and educating myself and learning over years and years and years. And I feel like this was the missing piece. And so while I've done a freeze on my wardrobe and it's just changed the way I think about spending, because I feel really empowered, I think it's really important that you've come back to this idea that, well, certainly as the host of the podcast, and the reason I was so excited to talk to you and bring you to my podcast community was because of how it impacted me. But this isn't the first money book I've picked up. I've done courses, and it has been years, and I think it's been a concerted effort on my part to understand more, so that predominantly my husband and I can do the best we can with what we're doing, but also empower our children to have a different view and different mindset and different habits around money. And so it's like with anything, isn't it? You've got to be ready for change. We know this readiness for change is important, but this might just be a seed that's planted for you to start having that increased awareness, not only with looking perhaps at where the money's been kind of flowing, but also the next time we go to pay for something. It's just, we can't make change if we're not aware of kind of the behaviours. And some of them are really habitual. And like you say, that pain of paying is really reduced when we can whip out our phone, double tap, and all of a sudden, what it was we wanted 2 minutes ago is now in our shopping bag, and we haven't really had to think much about it. So this idea of raising awareness, being mindful, it's going to take time. It takes time for us to develop the habits, and we often have beliefs and a mindset around money that's ingrained. So it's going to take time. So I wonder if, just before we finish, you have anything else that you'd like to add before we talk about where people can connect with you and kind of get in your orbit of becoming good with money and your world, which is called the broke generation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think just something to add to, that concept of, as you say, you've been working on your finances for years and years and years. And, I think it's important for people, and I do mention this in the book, you can be good with money even if you don't have the financial situation that you want to have. Because that, while you're right, it does take, it's something that we're always learning. And I would arguably say it's an ongoing journey that there is no end destination to. Yeah. But I know that kind of, for people that are at the very beginning, they kind of go, oh my God, I never want to. It's like when you hear that, if you start eating healthily, you've got to eat healthy every day of your life forever. And it can feel really overwhelming. But what I actually, want people to take away is that you can be good with money without having undergone the complete journey that you want to go on. Because when you have, paid off the debt or bought a property or started saving or whatever it is, when you reach that, there will be new financial challenges. And as we go through them, as we get more and more financially confident and financially engaged, we develop our sense of self-efficacy and our practical abilities as well to navigate change and to go to the next stage. And something I say to people often to sort of like really activate that like empowerment sense is I actually got good with money before I was debt free. There wasn't a number in the bank account that made me financially confident. I had made the shifts and changed the mindset while I still had a balance owing on my credit card. And that is because your level of financial confidence and your self-worth around your financial capability and capacity does not hinge on having a juicy number in the bank. Don't get me wrong, it can definitely play a role, and the idea that money doesn't buy happiness, when we're talking about basic needs being met, of course it does. But it's really important to remember that you can get into a flow of feeling confident with money and feeling like you have capacity and like you have made the changes and that you are executing on the changes before your bank balance says what you feel like it needs to. I think I was most in flow with my finances when I got into a rhythm of paying down my debt, and I was paying off $150 a fortnight. I had $300 of spare money a fortnight that come in, and I would put $150 to savings and $150 to paying off my credit card debt, because I was teaching myself in the process to save at the same time, because I was paying down the debt and also behaviorally reducing my reliance on credit when unexpected expenses came up or whenever I was paying for anything. And that's how I got good with money. But I'd say I was good with money before the debt had even been paid off. And so you're not necessarily as far from it as you think.
Emma, that is the perfect point to finish on. And so I want to thank you so very much for sharing just a smidge of your wisdom. The work that you're doing in this space is so powerful and empowering, and I'd love for anyone listening to be able to kind of dive into your world. So where can they find you online, and what kind of programs have you got that people might be able to consider to help them on this journey to behaviour change?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say probably the first place that you can dive into my world would be my podcast, the Broke Generation podcast. And if you're self-employed or you run a business, I have Broke Business as well, which is a much smaller body of work, but it is in development. And yeah, I've got sort of over 200 episodes on the podcast that I've been putting out over the last 3 years that can sort of give you a different flavor of various aspects of finance and behavior change and our relationship with money and the psychology of money. Obviously, there's my book, Good with Money. It's bright yellow. You can't miss it if you see it on shelves. And I'm also on social media. So you can find me on Instagram at the.brokegeneration. And then in terms of programs, I've got sort of my main like flagship program, which will be called the Good with Money Project, which links to the book. That's still being developed. But another sort of program that I run is a very niche program, but it helps women that feel like all their money is hanging in their wardrobe and they're constantly on this spending hamster wheel, particularly with clothing and fashion spending. So we do a 6-week project together. We have a stylist in the group that sort of helps you with the styling aspect. But what we really do is we break down your relationship with that specific part of spending because it's very, very deeply linked to our identity and our self-confidence. And we sort of move through it in a community sense, and we get you really feeling really confident with what you've already got, and we help you break down that sort of fantasy self that often we buy into when it comes to things like clothing. And I've been iterating this program over the last 18 months, trying different, durations and different methods of teaching. And the results are quite remarkable. People are freeing up thousands of dollars in many cases by changing their behavior on this. So if that is something that you struggle with, constantly spending money on clothes that you either don't wear or that you never feel like you've got anything, that you never feel like you've got enough of, hop on to my website, which is thebrokegeneration.com, and you will see on there that I have the upcoming wardrobe project. There'll be another one running from mid-October for 6 weeks, if that is of interest. Or you can join the waitlist to hear of the next one.
Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the impact that you and your work have had on my life and on my family's life as a result, because as a parent, I share what I'm learning with my teens who love it. They love it when I share the things that I'm learning. But it's just, bit by bit, these are the things that I learn. And for any of us who are parents, if you are a parent, talk to your kids. If you are having family dinners or family breakfasts or a lunch on the weekend, try to get together at least once or twice a week if you possibly can, and say, hey, I was listening to this podcast, and just start opening conversations, because I think it's really powerful when we can start to become more comfortable talking about it in our families. And I really encourage you to dive into Emma's world, grab her book and jump on the podcast and keep learning. I will be doing that as well. So Emma, thank you again for your time here on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I promise if you come and listen to my podcast, I'm a lot more articulate than I have been today.
Oh, it's so funny, Emma, that you say that. Emma and I, we've been having a bit of a laugh because, and we've been thanking our wonderful editors that do the wonderful work that helps us sound very articulate and like we've got all of our thoughts exactly how we, see, I can't even get this right. And we've got everything we want to say coming out of our mouths exactly the way we want to say it the first time, but that is not the case. So we're human, and we're both really committed to helping you to really be able to make the changes that are going to empower you to feel better about yourself and to be able to do the things that you want to do and live by your values and experience life the way you want to experience it. So I'm thankful to you, Emma, and I thought you sounded fabulous. So I don't think you could do any wrong in my eyes, but maybe I'm biased. So thanks again so much. And thank you for listening. I know that with financial stresses and anxiety around money and anxiety in general, that this can be an area that's really difficult. And I really sincerely hope that this has made a difference for you in the way you feel about money. No, I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm going to say goodbye to you and let you go, and then I'm going to finish what I'm trying to say here without holding you up. So, hey, thank you again so much for your time. And I really sincerely hope that my conversation with Emma today has made a difference for you and has introduced you to someone who might really be able to change the way that you are operating when it comes to your finances, and hopefully really empower you to be able to make some meaningful change and free up some of the stress, hopefully some of the anxiety, and some of your finances to put towards to the things that are really going to help you to live by the values that you have and do the things that you want to do and support the people that you love as well. So thank you again for joining me, and I'll be back again next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.